Good afternoon, everyone. My name is Richard Campbell. I'm a specialist in energy policy for the Congressional Research Service. I will note that my comments here today are solely my own. I'd like to thank the Lexington Institute for inviting me to join this forum today and will provide background to this discussion on the National Guard's role in cybersecurity. Electricity is vital to the commerce and daily functioning of the United States. While the U.S. electric grid has operated historically with a high level of reliability, various parts of the electric power system are all vulnerable to failure due to natural, operational, or man-made events. The electric grid in the United States is made up of all of the power generating plants, together with the transmission and distribution systems and other systems which bring electricity to end-use customers. The grid connects the many publicly and privately owned electric utility and other wholesale companies in different states and regions of the U.S. While most power outages are due to weather-related events, the grid is vulnerable to failure from attacks, terrorism, or even extremes of space weather. A report released by the National Research Council in 2012 concluded that well-informed terrorists could black out a large region of the country for weeks or even months. It said that a systematically designed and executed terrorist attack could cause widespread and long-lasting disruptions. And the report concluded that such attacks could cost the U.S. economy hundreds of billions of dollars. Similar conclusions were reached in a 2015 report from Cambridge University and Lloyd's of London, which theorized that a targeted cyber attack could leave 15 states and 93 million people from New York to Washington, D.C. without power. The scenario estimated that the total cost of the U.S. economy could be between $243 billion and $1 trillion, resulting from direct damage to assets and infrastructure, loss of sales revenue, business disruption to the supply chain. However, the bulk power system has mandatory and enforceable standards for cybersecurity designed to prevent such a grid failure. The Energy Policy Act of 2005 gave the Federal Energy Regulatory Commission, FERC, the responsibility for the reliability of the grid, with the power to approve mandatory cybersecurity standards. FERC recently added mandatory and enforceable physical security standards to its critical infrastructure protection regime. The bulk power system is comprised of most of the large power plants and transmission facilities in the U.S. That infrastructure is largely owned and operated by approximately 180 investor-owned utilities, which are subject to the FERC's mandatory cybersecurity standards. However, there are almost 3,000 electric co-ops and public utilities which deliver power to end-use customers in the U.S., and these are specifically excluded from FERC regulation by the Federal Power Act. They are not subject to FERC's mandatory cybersecurity regulations. Distribution utilities in the U.S. are largely regulated by individual state or local governments. Individual state utility commissions are responsible for the cybersecurity regulations, which means that these requirements can vary widely. Some therefore regard the nation's distribution system as a potentially less protected backdoor to the bulk power grid. Many of the smaller co-ops and distribution systems are financially and resource challenged when it comes to protecting against a cyber attack. Today's meeting offered a focus on the growing cybersecurity capabilities of the National Guard and the potential of the Guard to help utilities address these challenges. Since all electric utilities get most of their information on cybersecurity threats from the federal government, it will be very useful to have an entity cleared to review national security information to help interpret and assist utilities in reacting appropriately to these threats. In recent budgets, Congress has provided for the growing role of the National Guard in cybersecurity. In fiscal year 2014, the National Defense Authorization Act, the NDAA, contained provisions for the Defense Secretary to report on cyber operations of the DoD and for the Chief of the National Guard Bureau to assess the role of the National Guard in this mission. And in fiscal year 2015, the NDAA required DoD to submit a plan to Congress for educating armed forces personnel on DoD cybersecurity and cyber activities. we've heard a lot about the Ukraine, and we have that to look back at the cybersecurity attack in the Ukraine of just a few months ago to realize how such a role for the National Guard could be useful. The Ukraine cyber attack was again on distribution level utilities. There was reportedly a great deal of confusion in the early stages of the attack as to what was happening. When Ukrainian grid managers realized that the cyber attack was underway, they were then able to respond appropriately and began restoring the system to normal operations within hours. The National Guard may be able to help prevent a successful cyber attack, but in the event of a grid failure from such an event, the Guard might also be able to help isolate and rid utility operating systems of malware and enable safe restoration of electricity services. Moving forward, there is legislation currently in Congress with H.R. 60 that would look at the feasibility of establishing a dedicated cyber defense National Guard, specifically to further the recruitment, training, and management of such a National Guard entity. This may be especially significant given that the National Guard is largely organized and controlled by the states. A consistent level of training and secured access to the national security apparatus will likely be invaluable in dealing with cyber threats. However, it should also be recognized that the National Guard is prohibited from competing with the private sector, and that prohibition was addressed in Washington State by limiting the Guard's work to publicly owned power utilities such as the Snohomish County Public Utility District. The experts the Guard uses for cybersecurity often work in civilian cybersecurity-related jobs. With adequate provisions for non-disclosure and security, it is possible that a prepared and informed National Guard can provide even greater assistance to distribution utilities and co-ops in helping their cybersecurity roles. Again, I thank the Lexington Institute for holding this meeting and appreciate hearing about the real-world efforts of the National Guard in their cybersecurity roles. Thank you.